All right, guys, welcome back or welcome to the Defining Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Coach Andrew Simmons. My guest today, we're going to see if I can get the name right, Ticonderoga Advisory Coaching, Mr. Dr. Jake, Mr. Dr. Jake Tuber. You are the principal at Ticonderoga Advisory. And he's already threatened that he's going to use his psychology against me in this episode. So we're going to see how this goes.
Is that how my statement felt? Did it feel like a threat to you, Andrew?
Already, we're digging in and we're getting deep into this one. Really excited to bring Jake on the podcast. He was one of those people that when I met him, it was just kind of one of those magnetisms. I'm like, I want to get to know this guy. I want to spend some time getting to know him. And to give you guys a little background here, he is one of the many people that I was able to meet in Austin when I went and raced a half marathon this year. And I ended up popping into what I didn't know was the Endeavorun. I guess it was a camp that you guys had out there. And I was there to see a good friend of mine who has yet to be on the podcast, Mr. Foon Fu. But I met you there and I didn't even realize that you had done such a good job of entrenching yourself. I didn't realize you were the big dog on campus there.
Hardly. In fact, I think that's one of my goals is to allow everyone else to be the big dogs while I fade into the background. But yeah, it was the middle of our Austin retreat that we had, which took place the same weekend as the Austin Marathon, half marathon. So we had a lot of fun with a lot of people there to learn. A lot of people there were running different events for fun, seriously. And it was great. I know you popped in and yeah, it was great to meet you there. I'm really touched that you wanted to bring me on today and felt that way about us meeting. And I'm excited to talk with you and try to be helpful to your audience.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something there about leadership that I think we'll dig into, but it shows me that you already have a great knowledge in this because I think any great leader actually doesn't feel like they have to be the person that kind of quote unquote leads from the very front. I think a lot of us think back to I don't know if this is like the War of the 1770s where we just imagine that the leader was the person on the horse at the front with the sword, just kind of the old Mel Gibson. I guess that's way before 1700s, but just leading everybody into this battle. And I think that's the way that leadership has always been viewed. And that's actually what I'm excited to kind of dive in with you today. We had a phone call before this and just kind of got to know each other. And we kind of went on some really cool tangents that I did not expect. I expected that when I would talk to you, it would be, hey, Endeavorun this, Endeavorun that. And here's my business and here's what I do. And then when I found out that you do executive level coaching, I'm like, oh, I'm really interested to talk about this leadership and the inner workings of people and business, and that intersection I think are a really exciting topic. And I'm hoping that everybody else that's listening thinks the same thing as me. But I want to kind of, before we dig into all of the really fun things that are there, I want to give people a little bit of context as to who you are and kind of how you came into the world of running. So if you want to kind of give us just a little bit of background as far as your education and the like.
Yeah, and I'll try to tie the two together in terms of my professional background in running. The running one's a little bit easier. I was a average to above average high school runner. I just had a short college career that was hardly impressive. I was mostly a sprinter and a jumper, which you probably is not common for folks who now focus mostly on distance running with adults. And then I took a bunch of time off. I was never well trained in it. Didn't come from a high school with a real program. Didn't get the kind of training I wanted in college. It was just a side thing. And when I was turning 30 when I was turning 30, I got into running again. I only turned 30 once, to my knowledge, and decided to pick up distance running a little bit, discovered a little bit, did some reading, etc., and really fell in love with the parts of the sport that I think those of your listeners who are listening today already understand really well. And that through some associations I had with a couple of folks who I happen to know that are professional runners or well-known coaches in the space. One thing led to another, this sort of yada, 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 if you will. And now one of the things I do is help put together running retreats and some other experiences through Endeavorun. And I certainly am happy to talk about our philosophies there, what we've done in the past, what we're doing, but I don't want to turn this into an ad for that entirely. I'm happy to self-promote a little bit. No, just kidding. The educational piece is different. My background in education, I originally was actually had the intentions of being, this is kind of an odd way to frame it, but a professional philosopher. I was going to try to be a philosophy professor after studying that at undergrad. And found that a bit too abstract as I got into the working world. Got my master's degree in organizational psychology and continue to pursue a lot of work looking at organizational culture, change management, executive development, particularly leadership development and training were areas that I really gravitated towards learning, et cetera. And then went back to school again years later to finish off my doctorate in adult learning and leadership. And that really has been the sort of academic foundation of a lot of my work as a practitioner, working one on one with executives and occasionally their teams, doing large scale facilitation of workshops and things like that in order to make the most of it. And I do a little bit of athletic coaching, really almost entirely pro bono, and on very rare occasion, I'll pick up an athlete or two. And I'm really obsessed with the blend of what I use in the professional context, which is typically corporate focused leadership development, or maybe not for profit as well, but really focused on those organizational outcomes and maximizing individuals for that, and utilizing instruments of personality and behavior construct to better inform how people might make decisions or be in front of others or behind others leading, with the exact kind of stuff that I do in coaching athletes as well. And I've been really obsessed with that blend. I think there's a real lack of the techniques, tactics, and philosophies of coaching in the executive and leadership development space that are applied to the athletic development space. And trying to blend those two has been a real area of interest. Doing some research on that, putting together what will hopefully in the next couple of years be some learning experiences around helping coaches kind of translate those boundaries as well. So that's a pretty boring bio of who I am. Hopefully, if there's anyone still listening, they'll want to hear more. But I can't make any promises at this point, Andrew.
Well, hopefully they're not listening in the car, not nodding off completely.
Yes, or at least if they are, they're in the passenger seat, and it's by design.
Well, and you did mention to me that you have the most interesting fact in the world, that you've never had a cup of coffee, which allow me to have a cup.
Yeah, well, let me first back up a little bit and say it's maybe the most interesting fact about me in the world, which just shows you how uninteresting I am. I would never claim that's the most interesting fact, but no, I'm not a coffee drinker. I'm definitely a caffeinator. Don't get me wrong; it's not caffeine arrogance. At first, it was the taste of coffee, and then it was trying to avoid caffeine. And now it's mostly just to be able to say when I run a workshop and folks want to share an interesting fact that I don't drink any coffee and never have. So at this point, I'm kind of holding on for the shtick more than anything, because I have a feeling if I had a cup of coffee, I would really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll have to do another episode where we just it's you trying a really good cup of coffee for the first time and just watch you fall in love.
That's wow. Yeah, I've been someone once proposed to me that the first time I ever smoke weed should be on a live podcast with them. And I've not done that yet. I think coffee is something I could probably convince my wife would be a better thing. And actually, one of the only athletes I'm coaching right now, Lauren, is a coffee fanatic and knows her stuff, and she would go crazy at the opportunity to, pick out the beans, tell me how to grind them, etc. So maybe if she hits her running goals, I'll consider
We'll
doing
have to
that.
do a collaborative episode, and we'll save the weed smoking for Joe Rogan when you make it there.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to Joe Rogan's podcast with weed smoking and slight dabbling in misinformation. That could be a lot of fun
Well, yeah, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't?
for sure.
So let's kind of shift gears here. I will say that I do love being able to make this a conversation. This is actually already one of my favorite starts to a podcast. But I want to kind of dip our toes into this idea of executive leadership, because I come from a background in engineering where I kind of fit this weird world when I went into school where I I was like, "Hey, I want to go into engineering," and my advisor says, you have too many social skills to be a good engineer." And, I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but it was actually what was told to me, because most engineers are very, very centrally focused on what they are. They have a hard time expanding outward and thinking big. It's very much so, here's the very real result that we're trying to achieve, and not so much about how do we get there. Right. And so I blended this world where I took a lot of business classes and change management. And so my background is technically, if we're all looking at technical backgrounds here, mine is a little bit of supply chain, but I actually have a degree in engineering management. And so mine is all about project management, leadership, and actually being the person that has enough understanding about what's happening in the engineering world to lead the teams of people that are helping create the product. How do we drive something forward? And I only in the last couple of years have I realized that that's really set me up well to be a business owner and a coach. And I think one of the things that people don't understand is that once they leave their high school sports, that you don't have to just try and figure this out on your own. As an adult that coaches high schoolers, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that when I work with high schoolers, they assume that I have this all figured out. That like I think that we all assume that by the time you hit 30, you've there's something that happens like you open a door and you're like welcome to adulthood. You are now an adult. Here's your white New Balances, so you can go barbecue, like all of those different things that feel like, hey, you're an adult now and you have it figured out, but we don't. It's just like I know just as much almost I feel like as a senior in high school as I did, as I do now. And so where does executive leadership really fit and why do we feel, and I guess this is the big question psychologically, is why do we feel that we don't need coaching after a certain point? We trust it in our sports, but when it comes to being better at life or being a better business partner or partner, period, why do we feel that coaching isn't something that's necessary? We almost kind of look down on it at some point.
That is a really good, complicated question. I will try to give you as reasonably succinct an answer as I think I can, which is actually embedded in what you said before around this notion of you kind of graduate high school, you go on into the world here in the US in a Western context. And there's this notion that there's answers out there that you will acquire. And obviously, I think that, as you're older, you kind of realize that those answers are not there. Some of them are, but the more important questions don't always have clear cut answers and so on and so forth. And I think when you're younger, the coach is a very specific role. It is a person who is really designed to impart knowledge and then allow you to take their understanding of something to be productive. So if you think about a high school track coach or basketball coach or coaching, if you were to ask a high schooler, the context they're often first thinking about and almost only thinking about is in an athletic context. And the athletic coach has a pretty unique role, which is to have enough information to get someone's performance from wherever it is now to the next level, and then be able to disseminate that information and expertise in a way that actually engenders that kind of performance. And some do it by screaming directions at you, others do it by quietly encouraging you. There's a whole range of different techniques and tactics that are some deliberate, some are just outgrowths of the coach's personality, etc. When folks leave that realm and get to more senior levels, I think there's two reasons why they probably don't pursue coaching. Is one, they're probably not assigned coaching, right? If you want to be an athlete, if you want to do something like that, if you want to continue to play sports at the high school level, to do that, you can't almost really do it competitively without being in a situation where you are given a coach. I mean, there are some individual sports you could pursue, and I suppose there are probably ways to pursue competition outside of formal academic structures, but coaching is something that's assigned to you. And later on in life, you've got to go out and find it. And when you try to go out and look for it, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of different kinds of coaches, and people use the word coaching to mean different things. And so I think part of it is that we don't pursue coaching because we never actually really pursued it to begin with. We were just given coaching. And later on in life,
100%.
it's got to be something that we're actively, deliberately looking at. So I think that's one. I think the other piece too, and allude to this a bit, is that the term coaching has very different meaning in different contexts. And I think if you ask most people what coaching is, the first image that comes to mind is of a high school athletic coach or college athletic or even professional athletic coach. It's that context where you're the expert, you have expertise, and you've got to disseminate the expertise in a way that grabs performance. And at the executive level, or when I'm working with leaders and organizations, my role as a coach is not to do that. That would be closer to what I would say formally speaking, mentorship is probably like this idea of I have this knowledge of how I did it or how I think it should be done, and I'm going to give it to you. So that would be sort of formal mentorship or even teaching or advising in a way. That's what I would hire a mentor for or hire a consultant for. When I'm looking at an executive for coaching, it's much less and almost not at all about me having specific answers so much as me unlocking for them ways to go about getting the answers for themselves. In other words, my job as an executive coach is really to be the person who takes what you already know and helps you kind of see yourself a little bit in ways you didn't, helps you reevaluate how you're thinking about things a little bit, not just to get answers to specific questions. What should I do about this management challenge? How should I think about, leading this team moving forward? But to ideally get better at coaching yourself and really thinking about how to be your own coach. An athletic coach, to some degree, the relationship I think with an athlete should change as that athlete gets better at a sport and gets more expertise about the sport and gets to know themselves a bit better. So what the coach provides, their posture as an athletic coach should shift. But ultimately, I think it's slightly different in that as an executive coach, my job is ultimately to vanish. My job is ultimately to breed complete independence. Whereas I think, even the best, right? Roger Federer, Tiger Woods, they all have coaches, right? And none of their coaches know how to hit a tennis ball or a golf ball better than they do, or could really tell you anything technically that they couldn't. Those coaches just exist because you can't see yourself from standing in your own shoes the same way. And they can provide a little bit of, checks and balances to your own knowledge that just has limits. Very different than coaching a high school tennis player, of course. But as an executive coach, my job eventually is to not just help you figure out what you're not seeing, but eventually teach you how to see it yourself so that I'm not there anymore.
Yeah, I think one of the things that gets really difficult is, how do we, I see this as both coaching adults and youth is that, as weird as it sounds, it's like you almost have to teach them how to think and how to think through a problem and remove themselves from the situation, think objectively, and then dive back in, right? That removal of self is the biggest piece here because people often get stuck. And this was a big problem that I had as we tried to move our business forward is that I assumed that I was the only one that was having my problem in my business or the only one that was struggling with this certain part of, training or whatever it was. We have this sense that we're alone in this. And that's where communities and cultures are so important and so vital to this understanding that, oh, I'm not the only one that struggles with this. And it's okay to struggle with those things because that's part of the process. I think a lot of athletes, and I see this at the high school level especially, is that one, they assume they're the only ones that are going through the problem. And there's also either some shame or, something along the lines of, I shouldn't be struggling with X. This could be something as simple as human growth and development. This could be something as complex as like parents getting divorces and, fear and all those things that come into that. Like that shows up in how we, how we work, how we play, and how we perform. And so when I think through these things, I mean, there's so much in what you said that like, I read some of the reviews on your website, and I think one of the things, and it spoke so highly of the work that you do, is it said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that basically, Jake taught me kind of how to get out of my own way and kind of remove myself and really be able to think. And so how do we do that better? I'm thinking that our listeners, and I try to think of the listener as much as I can, someone that's an athlete, someone that's a professional that's trying to, I can't imagine that someone's in a job and not trying to move up to that next level. How can we better try to remove ourselves from that situation? I guess coach our listeners a little bit here about thinking a little more objectively when they hit a snag in their everyday, whether that's their professional world or they're just kind of hitting a point in their running where like, man, I feel like I'm not making any progress here.
There's something that's both embarrassingly humbling and at the same time very reassuring in reminding ourselves that we're not special. And what I mean by that is, and I remind myself of this all the time, is that there's almost no problem that I could face that, yeah, the specifics of it are obviously going to be unique because it's me and my world and my life, etc. but the kind of forms that the problem is taking, the sort of figures involved, the situation. There are, statistically speaking, just so many people who have encountered the same things before. And it's worth remembering at times, even if it's just a moment of, and what you're essentially doing is, you remember this, is you're creating distance between the problem and you. You're distancing yourself from it to some extent to acknowledge this by creating perspective, which is, yeah, other people have done this. The joking version of this is, anyone who's out there has ever had what they thought was a brilliant idea for an invention or a product. It's like, oh, this is so cool. No one's ever thought of this. You go and Google it, and it's been there for 20 years, right? This is the same issue with the problems we have. Oh, I'm dealing with this at home. Oh, I'm dealing with this in running, etc. There are probably millions of people across the world. I mean, truly millions that have experienced, by all generally speaking, shapes and sizes, the same challenge. So, to some extent, it's worth remembering that you're definitely, just statistically speaking, almost very certain to not be alone. And for some people, that means go and find a community of folks who've had those challenges. One example that comes to mind right now is, this is an odd one, but one of my colleagues, Matt Fitzgerald, has been really struggling with long COVID, just as the worst case of long COVID that I've really ever come across. There are whole online communities of resources for people who are going through that same experience, talking about different things they've done, things their doctors have said, experiments they've tried. So you will find that other people will coalesce, and there's something very human about coalescing around overcoming a shared problem. So I think that's one thing to do, is kind of give yourself a little perspective and realize that in the best way possible, you're not at all special. And to some extent, that makes the problem a little bit easier to tackle. But I do think that the larger question, beyond just kind of creating a little psychological distance and laughing at the problem in that way, is a much more complex question that really has to be handled on a person to person basis, based on the sort of psychological level of sophistication they bring to the table, a little bit about the nature of the challenges, what their problem itself is. And the first thing that I would say is generally true, from what I can tell across the board, that anyone should do, regardless of where you are in terms of the nature of your problem, who you are, etc., is to get it outside of your head. Whether or not that's putting it on paper by writing it down, whether or not that's talking it through with someone else, whether or not that's a hybrid version, which is just going for a walk and turning on your voice memos and talking about everything. And that often involves really trying to use labeling words to describe what you're feeling, and then try to ascribe what might be causing that. What other patterns are you seeing? Where has this happened in the past? Where is this a recurring situation where you experience one thing and then feel a certain thing? Really just trying to get it out, sort of outboarding that, if you will. One, it gives your brain a tremendous release. So there's a kind of just freeing of pressure. It's like opening a safety valve in your mind that allows some of the pressure you feel to get out. And that's in many ways why forms of psychoanalytic talk therapy are super helpful at minimum, just because it's useful to have what's living inside your head not just be the only thing swirling around your head. And honestly, talking it out, writing it out, etc., can be a great safety valve for that. But ultimately, what you're eventually trying to do, I think one way I would describe it, given my psychological leanings, is you are trying to take the things that you are currently subject to, your fears, your doubts, your inhibitions, etc. And by putting them out into the world and being able to look at them as if they were separate from you, not just in your head, but on paper, or in between you and another person in that space. These things which you have been subject to, you're no longer subject to. Now they're subject to you. Now you can kind of see them and say, huh, I was feeling that way after this happened, or I'm feeling this way now, and this has been happening. Might this be because of something else? Or can I reframe how I'm thinking about that? You get to play with it. You get to pull the marionettes of those things which are now longer sort of in your mind, rather than them being the puppeteers that are tugging onto you. And so the first thing I would say, regardless, and the specifics of how you should work with anybody will differ greatly, but I always encourage folks to find some sort of outlet to get some of those challenges just out of their mind, so that you can begin to toy with them, because right now they're toying with you a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think one of the big barriers there is that we first have to overcome that hurdle of not being scared to share something. I think what you mentioned there, whether it's long COVID, I'm kind of thinking in my brain, where do people where people actually end up stopping before they even really get started, because sometimes encountering those pieces of saying, this is how I feel, those words right there are will kill more dreams and ideas or the expression of those than anything else. So and again, I'm not trying to get too heady with this. I think this is an amazing way to look at how do we move through things. I think that's one of the hardest parts, and I want to actually kind of dig back into one piece you mentioned there about being assigned a coach. I've worked with a number of athletes in the past who have, well, they might have been a runner in middle school, they went to high school, they went on to college, and the biggest place that they struggled wasn't moving up in levels. It was actually once that coach was no longer assigned to them and they lost that structure that was around them, right? They did well in the sport because they showed up every day and they had other people there to push them, right? They knew that if they showed up at 3 o'clock in front of the high school, there's their community and there's their people. And then once they left college and they left that paradigm of I have to show up for this, and this in specifics, I'm thinking of an athlete that I coached that went to Navy. When they left, it was such a struggle for them to get into a daily rhythm and to be able to kind of buy into even having someone like myself as a coach, because there wasn't the community piece of this. So I'm trying to understand is, when we think about buying into, hey, I'm going to train for a marathon, I'm going to train for an event, or I'm just going to try and build my business, is there something to be said that, culture and community are the most important pieces of building something from the ground up, and understanding that we're not doing this alone. How do we kind of again remove ourselves from that situation? Because that was the really big piece you just talked about here, is moving from that place of things aren't happening to us but for us, right? And we're the marionette, we're the one that's controlling this situation. So to kind of think more broadly on this, when you're coaching somebody, how do you help them remove themselves from the situation if they feel like they're stuck in that place of I can't do this, I've always had other people to support me and do this? How do you get people to move outside themselves and be able to do these things for themselves?
The first is seeing whether or not they can get as far as you just got right there, which is to say, in the past, I've had other people to do this with me. I've had something else. Some folks don't even realize that that's different about where they're at today, that they're not part of the same community, that it's not being assigned to them. And one of the, I think, the tougher things about growing up, to make it sound both kind of sophomoric and silly at the same time, potentially really deep, is that one of the I see one of the more sustaining elements of our species' psychological needs is that need for certainty. And from the time that we're, quite literally in the womb, and being kind of like grown through the world till later on, we are increasingly exposed to the reality that there's less and less certainty. Parents are the ultimate authority figures. They have right or wrong answers. It's very concrete. It's very black and white. And you get older and there's more authority figures and more things and there's more answers, and you grow up. And some folks, for various reasons, some of it is clearly genetic, some of it is clearly the combination of genetics and environment, nurturing, and that what it's a healthy combination of both for everyone, and everyone's different. But some folks need more certainty than others in life. And later on, when you get past all of these structures that you go through, growing up with your parents, school, college, the institutions we go work for, which provide a degree of structure, going to the Navy in particular, right? A lot of people seek out the military because it does such a great job at giving you structure that can enable a sense of purpose and well-being that's really helpful. And it can be really, really a struggle when folks leave. I was actually reading a dissertation not long ago about from a colleague who studied folks who transitioned away from the military and what that learning experience was like to be a quote unquote civilian, and how hard that was despite being in their 20s and 30s at that point. And so I think that this need for certainty is always there. And the first question you want to ask is, I guess I should say that the answer to your question is you typically do it by asking powerful questions as a coach, rather than saying, well, here's what you could do instead, or here's your answer, here's your community. Sometimes you can do a little bit of that up front if someone's really in a dire state, if they're really, really struggling to get out of bed, if they're struggling with sort of the level that a clinical psychologist would probably say rises to the level of pathological or need of treatment, is giving someone a little bit of certainty. Hey, come to this group, come to this thing, come with us. Sometimes giving a little bit of certainty, especially if it's around togetherness and relatedness, can be really useful for humans. But eventually, it's really around asking those powerful questions to folks that is really about like, have you experienced this before? And if they get to this point where you've already illustrated of saying, in the past, I had this whole group of people, I had this whole, process I had to follow, I had a framework, or if I did XYZ, I got to the next level, or my coach knew to then do this instead. And now I'm just operating in ambiguity. Sometimes it's actually about getting folks really comfortable with the idea that maybe there aren't answers. Maybe there isn't a specific person who has the answer to this question. And, or if there are, you've got to kind of take it and make it work for you a little bit. And so, in some ways, the journey that a coach takes, whether it's an athlete, whether it's a leader, whether it's whoever they're coaching on through, could be described as the journey into embracing ambiguity, away from this need for certainty into a degree of self-actualization to which you can be comfortable living with a real degree of fuzziness around you and the lack of security. That is psychologically terrifying in a lot of ways, and I have so
Right.
much empathy for it. I still go through it myself all the time. There's no I do envy some folks who seem to have kind of gotten above and beyond it, but I think we're all constantly on uh, an unending continuum of struggle through that. That's the nature of the human condition in some ways. So I think it's really about asking powerful questions to help look at first past experiences, evaluate expectations around certainty. Sometimes it's asking really powerful questions to get folks up and running. You mentioned before, like someone who's like, I don't even know where to get started. I don't even know what to go do. I can't even give myself permission to ask these questions of myself. Sometimes it's asking a question of like, all right, well, to your point, if you're trying to get them out of their own mind, ask a question that actually puts them in another frame of mind. So a question of like, all right, if you were coaching somebody who came to you with this problem, what would you have them do? One question I always like to ask is, what would the best version of yourself want to go do in response to this challenge?
Yeah.
Something like
I
that.
think,
Something that forces you to almost attack the situation not as yourself will then give you permission to start embracing other viewpoints.
well, and I think it goes back to what we said, right? Like putting these, putting an athlete, putting a person in a position to actually coach themselves, right? That teaching of how to teach them how to think. And I do this all the time when it comes to, sitting down with a high school kid and they're like, all right, coach, how am I going to pace this mile? How am I pace this 2 mile? And almost always I sit back and say, well, first question I sit down and ask them is like, well, what worked really well last time, right? Like I'm if there is a piece to this, it's like success leaves clues, right? It's that big idea that like if we've had success, what led to that success? It could be everything from you ate really well, leading into the race. It could just be you were, just loose and excited on the start line, and that allowed you to relax and allow you to just embody it versus having this expectation. And that's actually what I want to dive into is this idea of expectations. But I'm actually gonna hit timeout. And we're back.
We're back.
All right. I feel like a radio DJ sometimes with this mic, like, all right, guys, we're back in action here in Studio G.
That was a hit from the late 70s coming at you right now. We're going to kick it out to Andrew, who's over in Denver. Andrew, you're on the line. Go ahead.
So, Jake, I wanted to ask you a really deep philosophical question here. We're talking all about past processes here. Now, I hope that makes the final cut. To the editor, please keep this in. So we talked inside our pod, this last little section here, and I think one of the places people can get really stuck, and this is like a personal thing in my brain that I'm trying to figure out, is working with an athlete that's maybe had a prior success a year, 2, 3 back now, and this could be a business success. Hey, this is the biggest thing I've done yet. And we get stuck into this comparison and almost kind of like chasing our tail where, what we want is ahead of us, but God, we can't stop looking behind us at this thing that we did. And so how can we help people that, whether they may have had a specific part of their life, whether it was an injury that may have prevented them from moving forward. They may have had, I think of a pandemic. That's 2 years where we couldn't operate our businesses normally. So I'm trying to kind of bring this into the running / executive coaching world. How do we help people get unstuck when they are so stuck at looking behind themselves at something that they did? Maybe it's their past PRs, maybe it's a past business success. How can we help people kind of move forward when they're stuck looking back?
So it sounds like this is something that you're experiencing now with someone that you're working with. Did I hear that
Yeah,
correctly?
absolutely. I think to give more context to this, what I see in a lot of athletes, and this is especially more so in a high school athlete, or even an athlete that may have taken a big break from, whether that, maybe someone that was a collegiate, and they're like, man, my best mile time or my best 2 mile time was X. And instead of looking and saying, let's say their 2 mile time, just for example, is 12 minutes, and they're going out in their competition, the best they've done is 14 minutes. And they can't be happy with 14 minutes because it's not 11:59. Does that make sense? Like they
Hmm.
are so stuck in who they used to be that they can't enjoy the fact that they've actually made progress, because the last time they went out and did a 2 mile race, they ran 15 minutes and they took a whole minute off, but doesn't even excite them anymore because it's not 11:59. They haven't moved the needle from their personal best.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like in your mind, in a more ideal world, the objective would be to run the race you're in and really focus on sort of where you are relative to where you were just yesterday, not years ago. What's define it for me a little bit more though. What would an ideal mindset for this athlete or someone like this look like that's different than the way it is now?
Yeah, I think back to an analogy that was given to me even just this last week is I would really love for athletes to look that when they enter a season that they wipe the whiteboard clean of, that mentality of like, okay, they almost keep this personal mental trophy wall of like, that's my best in this and this and this and this. They keep their PRs as like, it's always up here. It's at the shelf that they actually have to get this like little ladder for to go put things on, because it's always just out of reach. Like that's kind of how it feels in working with athletes sometimes. And what I want them to be able to understand is that, each season we have to take this new fresh mentality that, yes, you've done this before, but the reality that it's going to be right there the next time you race at the start of the season is pretty unrealistic. And then every time you go out, it's going to be extremely frustrating if your only goal is to try and get 11:59 and you can't enjoy the steps along the way. I always think of it and use another analogy of like, if we're trying to build a bridge, like you have to build it with the plank that's in front of you. You can't build from the back of the bridge towards you. It's just not how it works. You have to build that plank and just take the next logical step. And so when you ask me what's the mindset I wanted to take is like, what's the next logical step from 14 minutes? Like
So
13:40, right? Like, I don't know.
that's where you'd like them to be, is just taking whatever step they can take in front of them. Instead, it sounds like they're sort of fixated on some potential myth of linear progression that should be there, or wherever they were in the past is always the platform with which they're jumping from now. And there's a big disconnect between those two. What have you tried so far to get them to this sort of more enlightened state of thinking about how to progress?
I love that you're coaching me right now.
What?
So, I think a lot of this goes back um, to expectation. There's something, whether I think there's this outside force that they feel, and I'm gonna specifically speak to high school, but I think of this also to social pieces. I think there are people that assume that they have to be this certain person. In their job, it's like, ooh, Jim got a new Mercedes. I need to be successful enough so I can get my new Mercedes. And I think of it as where a lot of high school kids are, is they are trying to drive themselves towards, how do I achieve to the need of a college? The college says that I have to run this or I'm not good enough, right? So that expectation of I have to hit this, and it's like, God, like that is where I feel like my personal gap is like, just trust that if you continue to do the work, that like it'll come, it'll come, it'll come. And it's almost that when you give up the sense of you have to hit that, and that every race is your chance, is your only chance, or your next only chance, if that makes any sense, to hit this certain time and to meet the expectation of this outside force that you can't see, but you feel, and you put pressure on yourself. So I know I didn't answer your question, what you asked at all, but that is where it goes to, when I think psychologically for people, that there tends to be this desire that they have to achieve to this kind of unknown outside force, that they want something, but there's a gap, and they don't know how to fill that gap with trust.
And in the case of high school kids going to college, it's a known outside gap, right? It's here's the times that they list on their website that you have to be to get a scholarship, to get a partial scholarship, to walk on, et cetera. And it's important to remind those athletes that those standards don't exist for colleges to groom high schoolers to be as good as they can. They exist to make the selection process from a large amount of folks easier for the people at the college, right? So no,
Yeah.
there's no college coach who doesn't see it possible that a high school boy who's never broken 2 minutes in the 800 could one day become a 145 800 guy. It's
Right.
just they're making bets, and of all the folks they're going to give their time and attention to, they want the kid who's already run 152, right? I mean, that's just how they need to approach the situation. So it's worth always first asking the question is, are those standards there really meant to help me grow, or are they meant to help someone else with their process? That's not rude. It's not a problem. Like, but you are trying to achieve standard that doesn't exist the same way coaching exists, which is to get you from where you are right now to the next point in your training, the next point in your peers. So some of it is recognizing that those standards don't exist for you the same way that your running plan exists for you. They exist to
Right.
serve other purposes, which are college coaches that have to look at thousands of runners' times and decide who to dedicate their finite energy to recruiting and investing in and trying to kind of make the most educated guess possible. So I think that's part of it is a sort of an assessment of those standards in this particular case. But larger, sort of broadening out of the case of high schoolers and college times, I do think some of it is trying to unpack and maybe sort of I like sort of paraphrasing and restating for athletes at a slightly higher altitude or someone I'm coaching at a slightly higher altitude what I'm seeing their underlying expectations, or I'll use the word paradigm to be. So in this case, I would say, so it sounds like, if I'm understanding this correctly, if a high schooler came to you and was like, I've got to run this time. I should be better than I was before. This is my chance to prove it. How am I 2 minutes slower in the 2 mile than I was? That's crazy. Like, I can't enjoy this now because I know I have so much more in me. Why am I going backwards? I should be getting older and stronger. I'm not 70 years old yet. This shouldn't be happening. When I hear that, I say, okay, well, there's a should there, right? Which means there's an expectation. It sounds to me like your underlying expectation is that you as a runner will continue to do workouts that get a little bit faster, a little bit better, continue to have performances that on the same courses get a little bit faster, a little bit better, ad infinitum. This idea that wherever you're starting now, as long as you're doing things right, you will inevitably move up and forward in a linear way. And for a high schooler, right, I would sort of ask, like, is that a fair assumption? And it is. It's not, in this case, it's not a correct assumption about how running works, but it's a reasonable assumption for a high schooler in that everything they've been programmed to do has been, once you have a base of knowledge, you go to the next level class, which builds on that knowledge, and it's all more advanced. And you do this one thing and you get to the next level, which by definition is an improvement over the previous level. And in some ways, we may just need to educate runners a little bit better from the beginning that progression as a runner, as an athlete, doesn't fit the same linear trajectory as all the other things in life they've done. And so they need to rewire their approach to thinking about, if your goal is to get to 11:59, you may, in fact, run a very common pattern of running 12 flat and then 13:30 and then 13:20 and then 13:50 and then 12:10 and then 11:05 and then 13, like, that is actually not the sort of sine wave, if you will, the curve for progression in running is actually just a little bit different. And so Sometimes it's just sort of unpacking, like, all right, you've got this underlying expectation of how growth looks, and therefore you must be doing something wrong if that pattern isn't being achieved. In running, that's actually not how it works. And I think for high schoolers in particular, for a lot of folks, citing specific examples of folks that they admire and aspire who have gone through similar patterns, right? Look at this person's career and how it went forwards and backwards, and up and down, and now they're here. Or, I always talk about professional athletes that had their PR in college or a year or two out of it. They haven't stopped trying because they're 5 years out of it. Like, think about the amount of professionals that PR every year is very small, right?
Slim.
And it's slim, and it probably means they actually really were underdoing things in the past more than anything, because that's just not how progression in this sport typically works. So I think, those are runner specific ways of answering your questions. I think the more abstract, more universally applicable way to look at it is, let's think about what the shoulds are. I should be doing this. This should be happening. That's got to be based on an underlying set of frameworks, expectations, paradigms about what should go on. And we need to make sure we're actually using the right mechanism of approach. That's often
Yeah.
not the case. We're often applying a standard of progression in one form of life that is easier, that provides us more certainty, more experience. Oh, if I get these grades, I get to get through this class, and I get this certificate, and then I get to go to this school that has this certificate, and then I get this job, and then I get promoted into that's not how running works. That's not how a lot of things work. And it's just making sure that we're applying the right standard. And I think it's the generative questions that unpack those should pieces, those sort of, let's question the way we're thinking about it, not just the specific outcomes we're thinking about in this particular case.
Yeah. Right. And I think there's that ideal in our brain where it's like, oh, this should be this way. I love that use of should in this, because it already implies that you've already made up your mind about how this needs to go and how this progression should be. And that if it doesn't fit that exact framework, it never goes to, hey, that was okay. It goes instantly to, this is wrong. This isn't the way that it needs to move, and I'm doing something wrong. Something is wrong with me, right? It goes internal almost instantly. And so as we think through that, right, there is a should there, is what I wrote down here, is like, we often are disappointed when we're trying to chase something. And then when you ask somebody, hey, what are you chasing? They don't really know. They don't really have this deep understanding of, like, if I'm trying to hit 11:59, it's like, okay, that's your goal, but why? Right. And I feel like everything goes back to your whys. Why is this important to you? Why is 11:59 so important? Why not 11:45? Because that's faster, isn't it? Isn't that better? And so I agree with you that nonlinear path, we have this expectation always that everything we have to do should be linear, that I'm going to leave college and then I'm going to do this and then I'm going to climb, right? We call it a ladder because it's literally, that's how you get to the next level, is with a ladder. And like, it's like, we have to think of things differently when it comes to, human psychology and human adaptations to a stimulus, right? That's what this goes back to, is like stress, stimulus, response. And like, I want to kind of understand then, because you did a great job of coaching me here. I want to kind of dig into the coach a little bit. And when it comes to working with an executive, working with somebody that has a performance goal that they must meet, right? This isn't a I'd like to, this is a must. So now it's, my job is on the line and I have to perform. So we've moved from the minor leagues to the major leagues in a really big way. And I think about coaching true professional runners, or I think about an executive that's like, hey, we're going to let you go if we don't hit X profit this year, right? And it's like, oh man, the stakes are really high. And some people get really stuck in that operation right there. If I don't do this, and that's the all-consuming thought. How do we get ourselves? I think the big question is here, and maybe I've asked this already, is how do we remove ourselves from the situation better? You said asking good questions, and you said, the how can people, and I guess this is the last way I'll ask this, is like, how can people maybe set better goals for themselves that aren't just achieve X profits this year? Is it about being more detailed and actually digging down about how do we get to that goal? Or is it more about where are my gaps as a person And if I fill some of those gaps and do some personal growth, those will ultimately lead to my goals.
The goals question is interesting in terms of working with executives because to your point, sometimes the goals are set for them. Sometimes, hey, this is our goal for the person who's going to be in this role, and we need you to be able to do this. And so, one of the resources you might have available is coaching to see what you can sort of change behavior wise or do differently to reach that goal. It's very different when you're creating the goal yourself. And so, if you're creating the goal yourself, listen, I do think that there's, some pretty basic magic in the basic stuff and the smart criteria of goal setting in making sure that you're setting goals that are attainable, that push yourself a little bit, really defining a degree of measurability, that also have a degree of an end date. A lot of people have goals that don't have an end date or an end state. And so I do think some of those basic things that folks will utilize for goal setting are tremendously valuable. There's not many secrets beyond that. I think as well, though, there's a degree of wanting to wanting to make sure that someone I'm working with understands not just it sounds a little silly, but not just the why behind this goal, but the reasoning they're even involved in an enterprise of chasing this goal in the first place. So, you know, it's almost sounds kind of corny to say sort of the why behind the why, but sometimes, a coaching exercise where by default I'm putting someone through the five whys. Actually, there's a famous case study that they use in business schools. I want to say it's attributed to Toyota, but it was sort of a process where, like, if you ask why five times in succession, at by the fifth time, if not sooner, you will eventually get to sort of a core basic principled truth that you're driving at. And so sometimes it's not just saying, well, why do you want to achieve this and why do you want to achieve that? But it's really trying to understand like the larger reason for being involved in this experience, this enterprise to begin with. And once you get at that, you might be able to unlock what you're doing in different ways, or the motivation to do something might become clearer, and the need, therefore, to take certain steps might become more valuable. So, I guess it's a question to me of how important is it that somebody really has a deeper purpose and mission behind what they're driving at versus, sometimes folks just say like, "Hey, I really want to get this promotion." All right, why do you want to do that? Like, I really want to be at this job title. It always sounded like something I wanted to do. It might not be worth it to probe any further psychologically, right? We don't necessarily need to understand that, this need to have this title was driven by a need for belonging from a person who once did this that was ultimately rooted in a parenting style of XYZ and a culture. Like, to uncover that, it might be interesting and it could be really useful. And at times it really is, because the self exploration that engenders is really unlocking a powerful tool for teaching someone how to think about things in the future. But sometimes it's just enough to say, okay, like, you really thought this was something you wanted to achieve. Like, that's cool. For the sake of our coaching right now, let's just focus on it at that level. We don't need to be psychoanalytic about it. We don't need to go really deep on this. Let's just try to execute. And then my style tends to eventually push toward that, right? This idea of like, all right, we know why we want to get this goal. We thought about some strategies we're going to use. We're going to test this. We're going to, track progress in this. Here are the way I'm going to be sort of thinking about moving towards this goal and checking in on, et cetera. I think that one of the things that if I was coaching somebody, one of the things I tell them up front is, if that's all you want is like very behaviorist sort of, let's just reorganize the thinking really quickly to make sure we're being directive, this sort of, here's the goal, here's the path towards it, you're probably overpaying me. Like, you could get that in a lot of ways from someone who doesn't use the approaches or the disposition that I use. I want to take whatever it is we then accomplish and figure out the why behind the why and probe more into the ambiguity and wade away from the specifics of the circumstance we're talking about to them more broadly, because only then do you really begin to unlock in a sustainable way the tools to self-direct and self-coach and become more self-actualized in that way. So I have a bias in that way, and it means that for a lot of situations, a lot of people, the things that I would want to do as a coach are probably not what they most need, necessarily. And part of that is not that I couldn't take another approach deliberately, but for example, I have an athlete who I'm working with now. And again, I don't coach a lot of athletes solo. It's really rare that I take on an athlete. And uh, I'm having her basically design her training a month at a time from some resources that we've talked about as good starting points. She blocks it all out, and then she walks me through it and gives me the justification, the reasoning, and I just kind of poke and ask questions. And if she's really not sure about something and there really is an area of, I have this knowledge, this expertise. Well, the reason is like this is actually not a good time to do VO2 max work, given that you're training for this part, this race at this date, or given what you're coming off. And here's the thinking behind that. Sometimes there's providing some actual evidence and science, et cetera. But it's really about often saying like, yeah, you could do that. Let's try it and see what happens. Unless I think she's really going to misstep in a way that's, dangerous or, really problematic. I'll let her design and I'll kind of course correct. And then each week, or, we kind of go through how she was feeling and we make some adjustments to it. And we kind of zoom in and zoom out. And it's a very athlete driven coaching process. My role is really there in a secondary way. I have another athlete I'm working with who's like, Jake, tell me what workouts I need to do in this order to hit this goal. I really want to run these 5K times because I'm in this kind of generic shape before I go back into marathon training. And that's really what she wants. And that's what we'll do right now. That's not, I think she could probably get that from a lot of places that probably have more knowledge about the science of exactly why you do, we'll do 1,200 meter repeats for the intervals this week as opposed to 1K repeats, because that extra 200 meters of, fatigue is going to do X, Y, Z from a growth stimulus. I won't know some of the specifics of that as well as some of the coaches that I know. I know one or two other people that could probably give you an answer about the lactate buildup that is just a little bit more precise than my knowledge of. But that's not why someone would work with me. So, if you're out there thinking about coaching, you really need to make sure that not just that you find a coach to drive at your goals and answer those questions, but that you find the kind of coach whose approach is right for what your goals are, as well as where you are, and as well as being honest with yourself and where you are around your self-knowledge. And everyone thinks they know themselves really well. If you ask anyone like how self-aware you are, everybody'd say they're probably in the top 10% of people out there, right? It's like asking somebody whether or not they're a good driver. Like everybody would say they're probably an above average driver. Statistically, that's impossible. It's the same thing. Like generally, you don't know what looking more self-aware could look like. You can only know what it's like to be your own level of awareness. So I try to kind of gauge an athlete's level of self-awareness and their goals and kind of architect a coaching strategy between the two. I don't know if that answers any of your question, but whatever you said made me think about some things that I enjoyed talking about just there. So thank you.
Yeah. I think that goes a lot into buy-in, right? Like a coach has to create buy-in with their athletes, right? And I think one thing you touched on there before we move forward is that, I think of, are your goals set for you or are you creating the goal yourself? And I think back to just this last weekend, I watched one of my girls that I coach. She's been on a sprint medley relay team, and last year at state, they got second. Well, that whole next year, 365 days, she was always consumed with this thought of, how do we win the sprint medley relay? How do we do it? And, they went through in prelims, they finished third. And, the team that they were going to have to go up against ended up switching out at the very last moment. Their last runner, which is the girl that I coach, that's her position. She's the final 400 meter leg in this. And she knew that this girl was faster than her. And she had to trust that her team was going to put her in the position so that she could just go and do what she needed to do, because she knew she wasn't going to run any faster than she's ever run before in this, because she's already run, that weekend. She'd already had 3 races prior to this. So she wasn't going to come in fresh. So she wasn't going to be able to be, quote unquote, the best version of herself. She wasn't primed. This wasn't the one thing she got to push out of the way. She still had finals to study for. She still had all these other things. So she had to rely on her team to put her in that position. But she knew that right there. She knew the date. She knew the time. She knew exactly what she had to do. She had to go and run that 400 meters the best she could. And even if it wasn't going to be faster than the other girl's 400, if her team did what needed to be done, she was going to be in the position to execute and come across that line first. And so I think about some of these things is that sometimes the goals that are hardest to achieve are the ones that we set for ourselves, because we tend to set really unrealistic goals for ourselves. And everybody kind of gets, I guess, stuck when you ask them, why is that important to you? How does that, right? You said the why piece is here. And I think that's such a valuable piece. But it doesn't always need to be this deep seated understanding and this emotional piece of it. It's just, that's important to you. So let's go do that thing. And sometimes that's what I have to look at as a coach, is just understand, why is this important to somebody? And not at the level that's like, oh, it's a bad parenting thing, right? That goes 7 layers deep. It's just that, hey, like, I have a really high standard for myself. I'm a great student, and I want my ability as a student to match my athletic ability. I just want to be across the board good.
I think that probably make you a much better high school coach than it would make me, in many ways, because I think that that is frankly the level that a lot of once an athlete comes to you with certain goals as a coach that they're driving, it may be the only level of understanding you need is 1 to 2 levels deep of why this matters to you, and I think that is something that I could always do a better job of keeping sight of, which is sometimes I don't need to, not everything needs to be, psychologically driven unpacking. And sometimes it's just like, oh, this just really matters to you because like you really like winning at this thing. And I don't need to go into what makes you want to win or what would be painful if you lost. And just know like you're really driven by this. Like let's focus on that and put that front and center and use that as a target. That can be really important. And so it's really healthy, especially with younger athletes, to take an approach like that at times. I really like working with adults selfishly in many ways because whether it's in an executive setting or an athletic setting or whatever context that I'm coaching someone in, eventually, I think that the more interesting questions are the questions that go a little bit deeper. The questions of, well, I want to get this, I want to do this job, I want to hit these goals, I want to be in charge of this team, I want to have the, why, what's driving that? Well, I really value success. It's really important to me. Like, I like, I am more curious personally about where folks get when they are willing to kind of jump in the sort of not just deeper waters, but murkier waters of those other questions. But it's not always the right thing to do. It's not always helpful. And so it's a constant check that we as coaches need to be doing, which is making sure that we're not bringing the baggage of our own interests and desires for this person to the coaching engagement. And while we might be able to kind of push them to expand their view about why they want to be in coaching or think about things, like that needs to really be met by their interests. And I do think that, I see this a lot with people who are in any profession where they're helping someone else achieve their own goal, is really to make sure that they are very clear about the coach about where your baggage, like what you're expecting, what you're interested in, what are you bringing to the table? If I have this notion that I want everyone to become self-actualized in some way, whatever that actually means to them or to anyone, then I'm going to kind of approach everything with a sort of bias of always probing and digging and trying to get at that and reaching at that. And that may really be my need that it's really serving in the coaching engagement and the posture that I'm taking more so than it's their need. That's why, in therapy, there's a healthy tradition of therapists themselves being patients, being an analysis to make sure that as they're trying to read into what their patients are bringing up, they're not actually just projecting their own personal history and baggage into the therapy relationship. I think coaches need to do the same thing and really make sure that, what's driving us to take a certain approach or to set certain goals with our client is really not about what we want to achieve for them because of what that does for us, but it's really truly being driven by what their needs are. And sometimes just being comfortable saying, like, all right, well, if you really want to work with this and I can do that for you, that's maybe all we need to do. Maybe we don't need to do anything more than that. And sort of as a coach, knowing where your limits are and should be, I think is really important because I do see a lot of coaches in athletic contexts driving their athletes to do certain things or succeed at certain things or in certain ways that I think are much more about the coach and what they want to get out of the athlete's success than what the athlete wants to get. And it's always painful when you see that at the high school level or even the college level, where it's really kind of the coach's desires for success driving what the athlete does. An odd example of that, I was talking to actually a client who's an executive now who was a pretty good college basketball player or a pretty good high school basketball player and was recruited to a lot of colleges and ultimately decided to go to a pretty good D3 program at Amherst College. This is a long time ago. And when he got there, the coach just sort of benched him and didn't really play him. And all the promises that he made to him as an athlete about, where he'd be in the lineup and what was there were not true. And one day he went to talk to the coach about it. And the coach, in a very honest, straightforward way that ultimately was helpful, if not obnoxious, basically said to the athlete, "Yeah, I really recruited you because I knew that one of our competitors we're trying to beat in the league championships was really after you. And I wanted to keep you off their roster more than I wanted to actually play you within our system because I knew our system could beat them if they didn't have a player like you. And so that was why I really recruited you." And that's really devastating for the athlete. Like they made a lot of big choices about their life to pursue this. They ultimately transferred to a different school, to D1, different life and career, etc. But that is a really, frankly, fucked up version of the way a coach kind of takes an athlete's goals, etc., and uses it for their own gain. Um, and so it's really, it's complicated, right? We've got to remember that our coaches, the folks that we come to for guidance, et cetera, are not just benevolent gurus. They have their own interests, and that's not wrong in any way. We just need to make sure that their interests and why they're taking on us as coaches, as coachees, are really aligned, and making sure that their approach, their outcomes, et cetera, are really designed to do this. And that's why I have so much admiration for the folks who are, coaches of high school athletes that, don't get paid nearly enough for the amount of guidance and mentorship they provide these folks and really just do it for the kids in a sort of silly sounding way. There's an element to that that I don't know. It's something I really admire. I miss working with athletes of that age, and I have a lot of admiration for them, especially when it doesn't go poorly. I think I'm almost more impressed by that than the folks who, it's a little bit easier in some ways to coach a pro who's paid to do the thing, who wants to show up in that way, whose goals you're financially incentivized for certain reasons to align with. It's harder from a technical perspective, but it's easier from a buy-in perspective.
Totally. And that, I think, right, that's ultimately the creator of culture, right? That, if the coach, right, there's this bias that if the coach is so focused on winning and their only desire is to win, 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 and then they end up only trying to recruit people, and then the whole entire culture becomes about winning. And then at some point it's like it hits this place where it's just like, oh, that's all it's about. And right, and that's where I think, some cultures, it's like they dry up, and that moves away. And I think about like what you said from a business context, is that some bosses just get so focused that they will recruit and hire somebody just because they don't want somebody else to have that person with that knowledge and that skill. And not because that person is better for the culture, that they actually push the business forward. It's just taking something or someone away and removing them from that pool of talent just so someone else doesn't have that person in their pool of talent. It's a really selfish, and it can get really toxic. And I think that's where environments can really fall apart.
And I'll give you the
Um,
flip side of that, though, Andrew. Like, that's a good move if what you really care about is winning. And it's absolutely okay to make winning the
totally.
only and absolute priority. The question is, does everyone who's entering the building know that when they walk in? And are they reminded of that when they're still there? Because I think what often happens is that you tell an athlete, "Oh, we're going to get you, yeah, we're going to use you in this way, and your skill set could do this." And then it comes in, and the athlete's on the bench, and it's really just all about beating the other team, and the athlete's sitting there like, yeah, winning was part of it for me, but not winning in this way. Had I known I would be part of a title team but never see the floor, I would never have signed up for this. And I think that's where the problem is. It's not that, a culture where you only care about winning is necessarily problematic. It's that we're often not really fully honest with sort of what we are telling people when they're coming in and like, hey, we're about winning here. And as I see you doing this, you're going to be on this team and you're not going to be on my competitor's team, which is great for us winning. And you're not going to play much. But if you want to like hold the trophy and be a winner in that way, like then this is the team for you. Some people will opt right into that, right? Like if you had told
Totally.
me, Jake, you can come to the University of Oregon to run, you will never suit up in a varsity thing except for this one home meet. And, when our team's the national champions, you won't have scored any points and you won't be any good. But if what's really important to you is being an Oregon Duck and winning the national championship, then yeah, you can come and walk on this team. Like I might have said yes. Like that's an honest, straightforward choice I know I can make. We don't often see that though, whether it's in business situations and coaching situations, et cetera, is a degree to which we espouse that value over all other things. And I think it's the disconnect between what we tell people in order to get them in and then what we actually want from them then we're there that creates a lot of long-term tension, and to your point, cultures can kind of burn themselves out. But I really do think that, you know leading in many ways is about creating a culture more so than it is about giving direction in the moment. And I think one of the things to do, I'll tie this back into your athlete who's way too focused on breaking 12 minutes, right? Which is to say that, like, if you're in a leadership position where you have the equivalent of that athlete, someone who's really focused on a past success, a past PR, something, etc., one little thing you can do is really consistently demonstrate and therefore reinforce the behavior of being forward looking. And in other words, you should never really talk about last year's PRs so that they don't talk about last year's PRs. You should only be ever focused on what's moving forward if you want them to be focused on what's moving forward. One of the things that we don't realize is that as leaders, we have leaders have a lot less room to make mistakes with little things they say, right? If you casually let something slip, a lot of folks on the team will see that as your true underlying point of view or motivation and will think that's really what they care about. I'll give you a professional example right now. I'm working with an executive who was having a really tough time hanging on to a couple of star performers on their team. These are folks who are exceptional at what they do, some of the best in the world at what they do. They were really toxic team members, really difficult. And this leader was relatively new to the team and came in and basically sort of said, like, long term, these kinds of personalities can't be what sustain us. Like, these folks are great at what they do now, but they're not going to be there long term. And they had some support from their boss to kind of do what was necessary and ultimately manage to ideal behaviors. And if these folks didn't, you know, uh, interact as team members in a way that was going to be conducive to the long-term culture they want to build, they could essentially move them out. And that's what happened. But when it came time to move them out, their leader kind of let slip, like, oh shit, this person's going to leave and that's going to be disastrous. Our numbers are going to go way down. This is going to be really problematic. Like, there's got to be a way we can try to keep them around or coach them or change them, etc. And what the person I was coaching really found was that their leader, their boss at the end of the day, really wanted to walk the walk of, hey, yeah, at the end of the day, culture is what matters. And if this person's not cutting it, no matter what they do, we got to let them go. We got to cut them loose. They didn't really believe that. At the end of the day, they wanted to kind of bend over backwards to keep this star performer who is misbehaving around. And it's those little moments where this person really just said in an offhanded comment at a meeting, like, oh shit, if this person leaves, our numbers are going to tank. This could be disastrous. I wonder if there's something special we could do to keep them around. Everything else that their leader had ever said about, the culture and all that matters is keeping the right people there. And we'd be willing to let the wrong people go, even if they're great at producing, if it means the culture is going to be hurt. All that went out the window. And so reminding leaders that, like, those little moments of things are really important. So, to coach that person, it's got to be constantly like, oh yeah, I don't know if you could run, like, yeah, so-and-so ran that last year. Like, any of those comments are going to be potentially little moments where they think, actually, yeah, the thing that really does matter is me beating that PR that I set 2 years ago. If that really is what matters, stay on that. But if you really want them to focus on, and I'm not suggesting you're not doing this, I'm using
Sure.
you in the royal sense, but uh, you know, if you really want them to be focused on what's next, uh, really truly just focus on that yourself. And you can't really even allow a glimmer that it's betraying that idea. When there's something that always stuck with me, I remember watching this, Andrew, a long time ago, and I felt almost creepy at the time, but in retrospect, I've really have come to appreciate it, which was, I'm going to get the dates wrong because this is at least 15 years ago. It was, I want to say, and if there's a listener out there who knows the specifics, correct me on it. I want to say it was in the season probably around 2005. It might have been at Penn Relays or something. It was the year after the 2004 Olympics in Athens. And that Olympics, like many, was one where the USA relay team fumbled the baton exchange despite being the favorites, right? This is a common theme for USA relay teams for many years. And it was the women's 4x1 team. And I saw an interview with one of the stars of that team, a sprinter whose name was Lauren Williams. And this was I think it was like a year later. I want to say it was like after a Penn Relays win or something, months after the Summer Olympics. It's the next spring. They're interviewing on her telecast. And somebody asked her a question of, like, you went back and have you looked at any of the footage of the baton drop to see what went wrong and how you're going to change this? Or, like, what have you done in analyzing that? And she literally said something in an almost robotic way that had clearly been something she and her teammates and coach had worked on. She was just like, nope, I've never watched the tape. We haven't talked about it, etc. doing that wouldn't do any good. We're moving on to our baton handoffs in the future. Like there was this almost, and I was creeped out at the time. I was like, it's okay to look back at a failure and understand it and move on. And I was sort of like, let's stop denying the past in order to move forward. That's a little scary. In retrospect, I do feel that way. Like I do feel like accessing that could be useful. But I could also say, like, actually, what this person just needed is to not pretend to care about the past in order to be useful about the future. And there was a devotion to headlong looking at what's next that I was like, man, that's what it takes to be the best in the world. Like this sort of pathological intentional ignorance of previous successes or failures and a complete focus on where I am in the present and where that is in relation to future goals. Like, man, as much as that's not how I'm wired and as much as I find that kind of alien, man, is that impressive. And so sometimes it's worth harnessing something like that, of just saying, like, the past is really dead. It is truly inaccessible. And one day you'll get to look back and look at everything at once. And if you want those highs to be as high as possible, the way to do that is in the present, just zero in as if the past is dead. But man, is that tough to do. And that's not something that I would have been able to do as a coach. But whoever got her thinking that way, hats off to them, because I think she ran really fast after that, is my memory.
Well, and I think that's such an important piece. Like, we can't change those things that are behind us, but man, we can spend a lot of time thinking about them, analyzing them, and just getting stuck at times in those places. And it's like, that's almost where we waste our energy, instead of like saying, all right, I can't do anything about that. Like, how do I do better right now? I think of like, I'm thinking through this, and it's like, all of us are gonna fail after this podcast. It's like, I'm gonna go fail at something later today, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And I can't be upset that, I didn't see that coming. I can't be upset that, I didn't prepare for it better. It's like, that's the human look at things, is that we're gonna make mistakes. And I think that was one of the other pieces in reading, through some of your reviews. There's like, again, it's teaching this idea of how to think, in that failure is a good thing, and failure is necessary, but failing within boundaries and understanding that, and letting people think for themselves, just like you said with your client. Like, okay, why do you think that, and why is that the way that you want to do that? Because they may not get any physiological benefit from doing that workout, but mentally it's a huge benefit for them, and that's what moves them forward. And so, not to say that you want anybody to live a lie, but there is a whole lot to be said about belief. There's a whole lot to be said about, believing in what you're doing and the mission of it. I think back to that sprint medley relay I talked about earlier, and that, like, there was so much belief in that team that they could do that for 365 days, that's what they thought about. And that's what was important to them. And I think about professionals, they do that on a 4x scale. That if they're silver medalist, like, one of my favorite things to watch, I'll try to put one in the show notes, is I love, like, there's like these weightlifting videos of like someone who was at the 1996 Olympics, and they got bronze. And then the next 2 years they faulted on their third lift. It pushed them out. They may not have gotten a medal. And then, like, 2012 Olympics, like 16 years later or whatever, removed, however many it is, can't math right now. They come back, and, they come and they get that gold, like that delayed gratification. It's like, oh my God, it's so much better. But it's like, they just never stopped. Like, they made mistake after mistake after mistake at the highest stage, and that's okay. But there was something in there, whether that's the why, whether that's the drive, that just was that undercurrent that drove everything forward. That's like, that's why we coach, right? That's what we coach to get people to get to that place that one day they may get that gold medal, and they may not. But man, it's the process along the way too that makes them such a great person, such a great human. And I'll be honest, I don't think we can move forward in this with any more great insights and knowledge. Like, this is one of those episodes that, like, I'm gonna listen to. Like, I'm gonna get on the bike trainer after this. I'm 100% honest. I'm gonna re-listen to us having this conversation, because there's so many pieces. Like, I literally have like 4 pages of like notes of like things
Wow.
that I took away from this, because this is such a valuable piece that's got so much learning in it. That I think people need to spend some more time kind of picking this piece apart. But I would say that if I walked away from one thing from this episode that I really, really enjoyed, is that understanding how to self-reflect. It's such an important piece of, like, asking yourself, why do I feel this way? Why do I want this? That why question is a huge piece. But I think the other big thing I walked away here that is going to give me something to think about here is that idea of should, and that when we come up and we meet face to face with disappointment, and we meet, there was a lot of kids that were on the sidelines of the state meet this week that didn't get what they wanted, and they said that my goal is I want to be at the state meet this year, and I should be there because of X, Y, Z, and compared to others and whatnot. They should be there. Like that should piece is a huge part of our understanding. And so if you find yourself saying should when someone ask you why you're upset, is I should be there, then maybe we need to self-reflect a little bit more about what's happening. And it may just not be your time. And that's okay too. So this has been an amazing conversation. I don't know if you wanted to add anything onto that, Jake, but I do want to have a chance for us to talk also through one other really exciting thing. But I want to make sure you had a chance to put in your words.
Sure. Yeah, I like that idea, and I'll say to athletes, be careful when you should on yourself, right? And ask yourself that question of, in many ways, I think that if you probe a level or two deep, oh, I should be doing this. Why? Okay. Well, I expected a degree of growth. I expected a degree of success. What would that do for you? Well, then I would feel this way about my running. I would accomplish my goals. And why would that matter to you? Right? You keep going to that. You eventually get to a couple of pretty core psychological drivers of human behavior. And a lot of it is around needs for sort of recognition or security or success and tradition and some of those underlying factors. And I often think that once you access those, once you kind of put those out into the world for yourself in front of them, oh yeah, but I really, man, as a high schooler, I really want to win this thing because if I do this, then I'll be seen as a really successful athlete, and guys will like it, girls will like it. I'll get more popular. I'll be more in demand. I, who never thought of myself as an athlete, will be, walking around school like an athlete, and I'll feel a degree of self assurance around that. Well, what you're really after is the self assurance, and the success on the track is a great mechanism to get that. Is that the only mechanism to get that? No, it's not. And so that's not to say you should abandon track and field, quite the opposite. But you should recognize what it's actually really doing for you is not necessarily just about the sport itself. We engage in sports. It's play. It's a fundamental human thing to do is play. And we play to kind of hone our survival instincts. We play to figure out how to interact with others. Play is such an important feature of the human experience and the experience of a lot of other mammals that have a degree of uh, sort of neurological density, because it does a lot for us as individuals, as a species, to play and interact and experiment with that. And when we play, when we engage in running and racing and in sports, etc., we create these little artificial laboratories of success and failure that are entirely made up. But that doesn't mean they're not real in the sense that they serve a huge purpose in our lives. But it's recognizing that, like, we're engaging in this by choice, ultimately to fuel a couple of underlying things. It's doing something for us to do that. And I think once you start asking those questions, the meaningfulness of those pursuits in some ways becomes less important, because you're like, well, yeah, I guess it's all a game. We're all going to die. At the same time, opting into them becomes more important, because you can see just what a beautiful thing it is to have that choice and to be able to go down that road for yourself and with others. That's pretty beautiful. And so the paradox of that question of the sort of both meaninglessness of pursuing something that's playful gives it inherent meaning. That's lovely. I love that.
I couldn't agree more. And I couldn't think of a better way for us to end and kind of shift gears here. I do want to make sure that because you're here, you have something that's coming up right in our backyard here.
Mm.
So let's dive in real quick. I want you to give a quick spiel on Endeavorun, when you guys are coming to Colorado, and what you guys are doing and what it is all about.
Thank you. Endeavorun, yeah, it's basically trying to take a lot of what we've talked about today and trying to package it in a way that could be accessed by adults who lead busy lives. And the way we typically do that is through a lot of these retreats. We're pretty deliberate about the word retreat in an arrogant way, about not just being a camp, right? It's not just fun. It's really about learning and growth, but it's not in a corny, silly way. It's about other people who want to take running seriously. That doesn't mean they have to be good. It doesn't mean they have to be fast in any objective sense, but they want to take it seriously for them. So we've got another retreat that's coming up in Boulder the first weekend of August. And we've got a lot of coaches and experts and pros. We're going to be doing, last year, a bunch of Olympians stopped by the house in Boulder. We've got some pros. I know Nell Rojas is going to be leading the track workout this year. Nell's awesome. And a lot of other folks will be stopping by, experts that'll be leading various sessions, etc. You should come to this if you're an adult athlete who wants to take your running wherever it's at now to its next level this fall. It is meant to be a kickoff for this fall's training cycle. It is meant to really gear you to whatever race you're targeting or goals that you have. Even if you're like me and you're barely healthy enough to jog more than a couple of days a week, uh, this is for you if you want to take it to the next level. I have found it's been cool going to some of these, how motivated I am by being the one who puts it on. The weeks afterwards, my nutrition is dialed in, my focus is there. I'm finding new doctors, I'm doing whatever I can to get back out there. Uh, so this is really for anyone who wants to kick off their fall and take it the next level of seriousness for you. We'll have athletes there who are, trying to break 4 hours or 5 hours for a marathon or complete one. We'll have athletes there who are trying to run, 2:45. And the beauty of the experience is that it takes some of the things that we all need to do, and our experts tailor for everyone. So it's a lot of fun. It'll be in Boulder this first weekend of August, the same weekend as Boulder Taco Fest, I've been told, which will be great. We'll swing by on Saturday afternoon. We'll have a lot of fun stuff going on. We've got an awesome little house that we've rented that serves as sort of the home base, but people either stay with friends in Boulder, rent hotels or Airbnbs nearby, do some great scenic runs, some great workshops, and it's just a ton of fun. And it's I don't know. I have been so pleased with the folks who've come to the ones you popped by the one that we did in Austin this past year, that for a lot of folks was really transformative in both how they thought about their running and how they thought about their identity as people who are runners. So if you think of yourself as a runner, regardless of whether or not you're, running Olympic worthy times or, struggling to get a couple of miles done, you're a runner. And that's who we want there, is people that want to take their running to the next level, whatever that is. It's been really empowering, I think, in a lot of ways, to see folks go through the experience and come out feeling like a different version of themselves was unlocked. And that's what we try to do. And so we've got an awesome lineup of coaches that are going to be at this Boulder one. They can check us out. Folks can check us out at Endeavorun.com and look at the 2022 Boulder event. We've got some other events that are going to get scheduled that are going to be put on in the future. That'll be a lot of fun as well. I'm kind of keeping those under wraps for now. We're working on a couple of big different things for the future as well. And by the time folks are hearing this, we'll probably have announced that we've got a virtual community that's going to be open this fall as well. We're doing something called the Virtual Training Collective this fall, and it's really geared towards anyone that has a big late fall race, particularly anyone that's targeting CIM, the California International Marathon, which is open registration. It's one of the fastest events in the country. I actually think it's doubling as the Marathon National Championships this coming year. I believe it's the first weekend in December. And so basically from early August till around that time frame, we're just going to have basically a Slack group and fireside chats and access to pros and discounts on gear and training plans. For anyone that's thinking about targeting that, we've got a sweet house rented up near the start line at CIM that'll serve as a home base that weekend. You can join the Virtual Training Collective if you're out there listening. Even if CIM is not your goal race, we'll have people that are trying to run a New York City or Indy or maybe Houston a month later, or just trying to crush a local 5K at the Turkey Trot, but just kind of want to do that. You don't need a coach to be in it. You can have a coach and be in it. And the cool thing about that program is it's ultimately a pay what you can program in an effort to really continue to make our running equitable and accessible. So in addition to the scholarship applications that are open for our summer Boulder retreat, there's sort of suggested payment tiers to be part of our virtual community so that more and more folks can be a part of that, because it does require a good deal of expense to bring the amount of pros and experts together that we do for our retreats to really make them absolute top notch. So we want to make sure that we're also able to bring access to that folks in a more accessible way for others too. So folks listening can absolutely join us for the retreat. We can get them a little discount for being listeners of the podcast if they reach out, as well as, sign up for the Virtual Training Collective in a very kind of low key but fun way, especially if you're doing CIM, just because we'll definitely be there. But if you're looking to kind of have a group of people to push you and cheer you on as anything you're training for late this fall, that fall Virtual Training Collective is for any athlete out there.
That sounds awesome. I'll make sure that we get a chance to get some notes from you on that, Jake, and get some links up for you guys, both for the retreat and also that virtual training collective. Jake, I know we could probably sit down. I've got some even more exciting things. I'd love to have you on again. So we'll speaking of delayed gratification, we'll have to have you on for another episode here.